Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are you? In case you missed the announcement, I have a new novel out called Sacculina. If you were looking for a suspenseful Cronenberg-esque ride set on a billionaire's private island, I think it's right up your alley. Links are in the show notes. I'm still slogging my way through recording Oceania and preparing to record another novel as well. I've stopped working on any new material until I get the backlog cleared up, but I'll get back to it as soon as I can. Not that you'll notice. I have Oceania, Extinction, Sacculina Kill Shelter, and An Ancient Trap to record this year, so it'll be damned busy time. Considering I can only do 3 or 4 chapters a day due to my strained voice, it's going to take a while. However, I still have a book left on my contract with RTP, so I'll have to break up the recording with some writing in the near future. But the slog goes on. That's all the news I have at the moment. Check out Sacculina and see if it's for you. I'd really appreciate it. Be safe, have a great couple of days, and we'll talk again Friday. Here's episode 19 of Neptune Scars. Chapter 39. The Leviathan was nearly in range. Gunny transmitted coordinates to his nanosats as well as over the general Trident bands. Any SE or human listening would get the message, provided they could hear, that was. Gunny's missile racks were somewhat depleted, but the ace in the hole was on its way. Still, it wouldn't hurt to send some party favors. 4 missiles left their bays and streaked toward the shimmering thing that seemed to create its own horizon. Gunny lost their signal shortly after they crossed the halfway point between Proteus and Trident Station. Gunny saw the flashes of the explosions but could barely detect any damage done. The thing, much larger than any he'd imagined possible, vibrated in space, the dark matter jittering and jagging from its presence. He rotated the LeBlanc, essentially uncorking the entrance leading to the station's interior infrastructure. Although he hadn't wanted to do it, it was the only way to secure a firing solution on the Leviathan and the friends it had no doubt brought with it. What I wouldn't give for a full crew, he thought. He'd have air support vehicles providing cover, skiffs with Marines diving in and out of the infrastructure while they played hide-and-seek with the starfish, and the LeBlanc could bash the shit out of whatever came down the pike. All he could hope for now was to not get swarmed while he did his best to slow the Leviathan. That thought in mind, he fired another pair of missiles. He was getting dangerously close to running out. LeBlanc hadn't been carrying a full rack. What he wasn't short on, however, was flak and energy. The fact he didn't have to worry about life support meant the ship could save an enormous amount of power. That power was about to be completely directed to the gravitic cannons. All he had to do was wait for the Leviathan to come a little closer, and the real fun could begin. After the pair of missiles detonated in the far distance, Gunny zoomed in as far as he could. One part of the shimmer on the lower left looked odd, as though it wasn't quite complete. Maybe damaged you after all, Gunny thought. It was going to take a lot more than that, though. The kernel of an idea was forming, but it hadn't quite clicked. Now for the first time, Gunny wondered why the collective hadn't seen fit to make him just a little smarter than he'd been before. Pure fear, I'm sure. If he'd had a mouth, he'd have been grinning maniacally. The last time she'd crawled through a tube like this, Exos had been behind her, in front of her, above her. Shit, they'd been everywhere. The starfish had clambered inside the tubes using their powerful arms, scrambling like spiders. She shook off the shivers and continued following Osorio. All 3 Marines had set their suits' proximity sensors to full sensitivity, providing them both a rough outline of the tube, as well as a possible heads-up before they encountered anything in the dark that happened to bite, tear, or spit. Progress was maddeningly slow, and every now and then she felt a tremor through her gloves' tactile sensors. This was taking too long. She imagined the creatures had more or less crowded themselves into any space that might lead to living human beings. If they were continuing to smash through bulkhead after bulkhead, it wouldn't be long before they reached inhabited areas. If those areas were unpowered, for whatever reason, or the grav plates failed, there'd be nothing to stop the creatures from flooding in and setting up nests. Gravity and heavy water were the Exos' Achilles' heel, the 2 weapons the human race had in their arsenal. Just had to find a way to use them. Lieutenant, Osorio called out. Got a junction. A quick glance at the section schematics confirmed it. Okay, Marines, here's where things get interesting. We're going to pop the hatch, drop in a grenade, close the hatch, and back up. Is something down there? Kuchia asked. Don't know, Kelly said. And unless one of you brought a drone, I don't think there's any other way to get a heads up. You thinking flash and drop, Lieutenant? Osorio asked. Sort of, she said. We toss their grenade, wait for it to go off, and take a peek. If any Exos are in the immediate area, they'll get flattened. The digital outline of Osorio's body moved and writhed as he pulled a grenade from his belt and shuffled to the hatch. "Give me a little room, sir." "Copy," Kelly said, and scooched back 1/2 meter. If something came through that hatch at them and somehow knocked Cuccia out of the way, she'd have no way forward or back. She'd be completely trapped. Osorio touched his glove to the hatch, and it immediately unlocked. She wasn't sure, but she thought he glanced back at her before hitting the release. He pulled up the hatch just far enough to drop the grenade and quickly shut it. Callie silently counted, and when she reached the number 8, she felt the vibration through the metal. She pulled her rifle from her back and aimed it at the tube wall, not wanting to accidentally shoot Osorio in the face. "Ready?" she asked the Marine. "No, but I'm doing it anyway." She listened to him take a deep breath over the comms and then reopen the hatch. His helmet light came to life and quickly panned the area. "Clear," he said, and cut his light. "Good," she said. "Drop in, full clear, and I'm right behind you." "Copy," Osorio said, and pushed himself through the hatch. Kelly watched his body glide through and waited a few beats after his feet disappeared. Steeling herself, she shuffled forward and pulled herself into the junction. No atmosphere, no gravity, no light. They were inside Trident's true infrastructure. The supports and racks, the energy transfer systems, water, life support, you name it. It was all here. Modules connected to the racks immediately plugged into those systems. The only problem was that if the rack went dead, so did all the modules unless they had their own backup power supplies, which most of the interior modules had. She didn't know if the trio hadn't yet equipped the outer module arrays with the backups, or if they had always been planned to serve more as storage and a buffer from external threats. Regardless, the modules they'd left had been dead apart from emergency flashers. The rack was down. Kelly landed on the deck and took up position opposite Osorio. After calling clear, Cuccia came down and closed the hatch behind him. She set her suit lights to the lowest possible power and brought them to life. The rack junction, 5 meters tall, 10 meters wide, and stretching for nearly a kilometer, swallowed the minuscule photons as though they didn't exist. The good news was she didn't see any shimmers. The bad news was visibility was practically nothing. After killing the suit lights, she felt as though she should be whispering instead of speaking. "We're moving to the port side and then we're heading inward. Questions?" "No, sir," the 2 men said. Kelly said, "Stagger formation, Cuccia up front." "Copy." Cuccia started moving out, his posture slowly straightening from a combat crouch. If she checked her 6, she was sure Osorio was doing the same. The tube was big, but even so, it felt as though it was directly at your back when you were plunged into absolute darkness. But the dark was the only way to keep the creatures from swarming. They seemed to detect life and want it, but they fed on photons just as much as they would flesh and blood. Light made them swarm and called them like a dinner bell. Kelly wasn't going to give them that if she could help it, at least not until she could get gravity going. Once that happened, she'd have no issue with smashing the things with all the photons they wanted. As long as they fed over a functional grav plate, they were more than welcome. The Leviathan took a broadside of gravitic cannon fire, but the rounds seemed to be detonating too far away to do much good. Although Gunny couldn't see them, their own shimmers lost in the maelstrom the Leviathan generated, he knew there must be swarms of starfish surrounding the massive creature. Thousands upon thousands willing to die for their giant, or maybe that was simply their instinct. Instead of coming in as he expected, the Leviathan instead changed course. "Where the fuck are you going?" Gunny asked before calculating his trajectory. When he saw where it was headed, he instantly felt something he hadn't since he was human. Fear. Gunny pushed further away from the station and out into open space. A cluster of starfish spun out of the darkness and spread apart just before he could get a shot. 2 of them landed on the hull and began tearing at the plates. The anti-personnel flechette launchers, designed for this very possibility, blasted out tritium and atmosteel chaff, shattering the carapaces. 2 more landed where they'd been, then 2 more. More on the ventral starboard holes, the flechette cannons blasting with precision, and yet he knew the inevitable would occur. He'd run out of ammo. Rather than giving more of them a chance to latch on, Gunny cranked the gravitic engines to full and damned the Trident Station wake rolls. The sudden acceleration peeled 9 of the 10 creatures off the hull, but the hardened atmosteel hull plates had still taken a beating. If the LeBlanc took a concentrated hit in that area, she might find herself open to vacuum. Without a human crew aboard, Gunny had no reason for life support or gravity. While he could change that last rather easily and overload the grav plates to destroy any exos, they'd ultimately fail when redlined. It was a short-term solution he didn't think would save the ship's internals. The LeBlanc powered through the swirling remains of carapaces and other detritus. Gunny had to cut his acceleration while blasting the remaining starfish with the flechette cannons. The LeBlanc had been made to take a lot of punishment, but accelerating at 20 Gs through dense clusters of creatures was asking a bit much. It was impossible to get a shot through to the Leviathan. Gunny activated the forecannons and fired dozens of gravitic teardrops into the shimmering darkness ahead. They struck targets long before reaching the monster. Gunny was doing nothing more than clearing out starfish, and that appeared to be a Sisyphean task. The EMR interference had rendered his comms useless. If Trident hadn't been able to hear him before, they certainly couldn't now. He'd even lost comms with the nanosats and the Neptune surveillance network. Gunny, down to his last 2 missiles, decided chasing the Horde wasn't an option. He needed to do something a little unorthodox. He sent the LeBlanc into a negative vector while punching the acceleration. In mere moments, he was clear of both the trail of debris the Leviathan left in its wake, as well as the thousands or hundreds of thousands of starfish. The Leviathan appeared to have some kind of sphere of influence. The smaller creatures, a relative term to be sure, remained within a certain range and didn't bother giving chase to the large battleship moving below them. Gunny finally got a good look at the Leviathan's ventral side, and if he'd had a mouth, he would have screamed. The thing's tentacles streamed out behind it for nearly a kilometer, the pseudopods writhing and squirming with living creatures whose shapes made no sense. The massive thing didn't have a body so much as a form, visible waves of some kind undulating beneath it, seemingly driving it forward. Tooth-filled maws sprouted randomly across its ventral side and disappeared in the matter of milliseconds before a new batch took their place. The Leviathan seemed to be only partly in this reality, and he felt as though he wasn't seeing what it really was, but rather what he could perceive and make sense of. Then he continued accelerating past the thing and its brood. If he could get far enough out in front of it, and if the creatures flying around it were thinner in that area, he might be able to give it a broadside, maybe slow it down a little. Slow it down? You want to kill it. With what? Rocks? That was the problem, wasn't it? He only had 2 missiles, enough flak ammunition to keep himself from getting overwhelmed by starfish clusters for a short period of time, and no human crew to help. In short, there wasn't much he could do other than harass and delay, at least not until reinforcements arrived. If they didn't, he wasn't certain there was any way to destroy the creature short of detonating the LeBlanc inside of it, and he wasn't even sure of that. Last option, he told himself. Can't protect Trident if he don't somehow exist. Chapter 40. The walk seemed so much further than it had actually been. Kelly thought that darkness had a way of doing that, of warping your sense of time, location, and the relevance of both. The map on her HUD, however, didn't lie. They were almost at the power junction. Here's where things get tricky, she told herself. Unlike the rest of the rack, this area actually had obstacles of the kind that could perforate a suit. Without the mains properly connected, she'd have to activate the so-called backup reactor that had never been used. Shit, for all you know, it's never been tested. That was unlikely. She couldn't imagine the trio allowing a single piece of untested kit to find its way into the infrastructure. That just didn't seem possible. That said, this wasn't going to be a simple flip-a-switch moment, was it? Worse, it would require light. Okay, Alpha, I'm going to bring one of my lights up. Keep yours off and be ready for movement or shimmers. Copy, the 2 men said. Fortunas had sent her the instructions before they entered the racks. First things first, find the damn thing. Kelly shut off her suit lights and set her helmet light to its most narrow, dimmest setting. Now. A cylinder of light no wider than a pencil beamed down on the machinery in front of her and reflected back at her. Cursing, she adjusted her position and tried again. This time, the beam didn't jump right back at her visor, and she saw the edge of what she thought was a biohazard symbol. Kelly carefully traced the rest of the outline with the light to be sure. After clamping her mag gloves to the power supply's face, she reoriented her body until her feet stood upon it. She kneeled down and found the control panel. Fucking microgravity. She'd been looking at it from the side. Her light panned over a dead control panel. Kujia, Osorio, this might make a light show. Copy, the 2 men said without asking questions. Kelly paused before pressing her glove against the screen. The holo display came to life and a console floated before her, the staticky blue light casting the equivalent lumens of a match in a lightless, empty concert hall. Even so, it might be too much. She scanned the display briefly before selecting the options Fortunas had given her. All in all, the system had been made simple enough for any jarhead to use. She'd have to commend the trio on making that decision. After checking the options, ensuring the lights were off but emergency systems were on, and making damn sure the grab plates would come up, her finger quivered over the Commit Changes button floating in midair. Bringing up the power. Now, now, now. Kelly tapped the commit button. For a moment, nothing happened, but she felt the vibrations through her boots and grinned. She killed the holo display and it flickered out with a staticky belch of bluish light. Okay, it's warming up the batteries, she said, and unstrapped her rifle. Any idea of the order, Lieutenant? She blinked. What do you mean? A series of emergency lights came to life up and down the rack. The kilometer tunnel of darkness was suddenly bathed in reddish light from the line of lamps, spread 5 meters apart, that ran from one end of the rack to the other. Fuck! Osorio yelled, and Callie immediately saw what he did. The end of the rack facing vacuum seemed dimmer than the rest of the tunnel. The more she watched, the surer she was the light was being swallowed. Worse than that, the squirming abyss was coming toward them. Kuchia, check spinward. Callie kept her rifle aimed down the tunnel. Osorio, I want claymores. Give us 40 meters of space and 2 of them in the area. Don't arm either. Just make sure they're paired. Aye, sir, he said, demagged from the deck, and squirted toward the target with his suit jets. Lieutenant, pretty sure they're down there, Kuchia said, but I don't think they're coming to us. She nodded to herself. That's where the people are. They're trying to tear through into the rest of the station. Shit, Kuchia said. We're feeding them. We are, Kelly said. Hadn't planned on that. Osorio finished tossing the claymores and they popped up on her HUD. Okay, I want to hold this area. Osorio, take dorsal, Kuchia starboard, and I'll take port. Shoot ventral. The flechettes will be bouncing in here if you use them, but they'll probably run out of momentum pretty fast. Kuchia grunted. Satellite war. Got it, Lieutenant. She both did and did not know what he meant. Studying both the Mars insurrection and the satellite war had been compulsory for her SFMC IDOC. Her being Martian had made it ultra-compulsory. Aye, sir, Osorio said. We've seen this before. Kelly wanted to tell him he hadn't seen shit until he'd watched a starfish literally unzip a man with a line of its deadly acid. Instead, she said, They spit. If you get any of it on you, you're dead. Neither man responded for a moment before Kuchia said, Forgot about that, sir, but I've seen the hollows. And I'm sure you saw cam feeds of what we went through on Mira, she thought. I'm sure you think you can handle it, too. We'll see soon, she thought, as she watched the abyss come up the tunnel. Real soon. Copenhagen felt a wave of triumph when the maintenance hatch finally cracked open. As she moved to enter the tube, her rear suit cam feed flashed with shadowy movement. She turned and aimed her flechette rifle down the corridor. Without waiting to see a target, she pulled the trigger 4 times. The rounds hit the bulkheads and deck before shattering into atmosteel shards infused with tritium water. The spatter of metal bounced across the bulkheads, ricocheting down the corridor and shredding 2 starfish into pieces and damaging the 3rd. Rather than waiting to see if she'd neutralized the targets, she jumped inside the tube and shut the hatch. Heart pounding, she switched her flechette rifle for the gravitic. At this close range, she'd end up tearing herself to pieces if she fired flechettes. That was a last resort weapon now. Same went for their grenades. Once certain the creatures weren't going to tear through the tube, she took deep breaths through her nose, exhaling cleanly through her mouth, the electric tingle of adrenaline subsiding slightly, and her brain no longer buzzing as though filled with bees. She pulled a claymore from her belt, aimed it at the hatch, and crawled upward through the tube. If she could make it to Rack 2's internals, she could better protect herself, maybe even find a way to finish the mission. How much time had passed? Were the other racks already being cleared? Or none of them? Can't control what you can't control, she said to herself, although the mental voice was that of Gunny Cartwright. As much as it hurt to think of him, his little aphorisms still comforted when she needed them. She wondered what he would say in this situation. Probably something along the lines of, Get your shit together and get moving. They ain't paying us by the hour. Grinning, she reached the rack hatch, caught her breath, and placed a glove against the metal. She didn't know what she expected to feel apart from vibrations, maybe the tap and click of talons on Atmos steel, or perhaps the smash and crash of SV rounds blasting through the rack. Instead, there was nothing. The rack was completely unpowered, and the creatures were somewhere else. For the moment, she reminded herself. Copenhagen placed a glove against the release and felt the magnetic bolt shoot. She pressed downward and the hatch opened into more yawning darkness. Might as well have my eyes closed, she thought. For fear she'd freeze up, she forced herself to climb inside the rack like a maglocked crab before shutting the hatch. She had little doubt there were more starfish in the corridor by now, only a matter of time before they figured out where she'd gone. Copenhaver brought up her HUD and oriented herself. She was more than 100 meters away from the power station. 100 meters. She could jet there in the darkness and reach it in a few seconds. She could also scuttle across the bulkheads, keeping as flat as possible, and reach the target in 10 minutes on the pessimistic side. Void. She could walk as tall as she wanted to and be there in less than 20 seconds. She could do any of those things, but she'd still be dead. Her low-light filters picked up a shimmering cloud down the rack. From the concentration, she figured there must be hundreds, if not thousands of them down there. Dozens of shimmering shapes glided beneath her as they moved further down the tunnel. Not only couldn't she reach the power generator, but she also couldn't walk down the other end with creatures still flying through it. She was trapped. Gunny accelerated past Neptune and into open space. According to his sensors, he had more than 2 minutes before the Horde's outer bands arrived. He'd killed all the ship's lights during the fast journey and let their gravitic cannon cells recharge. He'd need everything he had for this next stupid suicidal attack. His first suicide was when he'd hopped aboard an alien artifact in an attempt to save it. Then it had blasted him into a nearly brain-dead wreck of a human being. He'd chosen to die rather than remain like that. He'd chosen to come back and fight, even if it meant being little more than a computer simulation. At least he could take a few of the bastards with him this time around, and it wasn't as if he had to worry about an afterlife after all. That nonsense had been sorted. He'd already lived in the afterlife, and when he was finally switched off for whatever reason, that would be that. So was this really suicide, or merely the waste of an extra life in a holo game? He grinned at that. Imagine being reduced to nothing more than a caricature that a juvenile could control in a war game and move around as they pleased. But isn't that what the collective had done to him and the rest of the human race? Maybe not directly like a puppeteer, but certainly with technology and political manipulation. Now the puppet was permanently attached at the strings, but still not quite under control. Maybe killing more of these bastards would put humanity that much closer to being free. Or maybe he was just void-damn delusional. 1 minute. Time stretched into infinity, and although he shouldn't have access to his vast troves of information, he still did. He still received updates from the nanosats, knew that Trident Station was still under attack, although no longer under threat from the massive Leviathans. Now it was the Neptune Scar that was under attack, or soon would be. He had a feeling that if the Leviathan's battle group, the most familiar term he could find to describe it, managed to reach the Scar, they would open it and bring in creatures large enough to devour and suffocate the solar system of light, and ultimately of life. The Scar's light show had remained constant even if there was no pattern to it. The remaining few sats hadn't detected any rise or fall in energy readings. In short, status quo. But when the Leviathan reached it, all bets were off. Gunny didn't bet. The battle group's shimmering ventral side came into view, light seeming to be torn apart as it entered the vicinity. After several milliseconds of forecasting position, analyzing cluster movements and the like, he fired one of his 2 remaining missiles into the mass. The missile, a mere 10 kilometers from its target, shot through the gaps Gunny had forecast and sped unhindered. Once it pierced the veil, all telemetry ceased, but the flash that tripped his photosensors and the brief wash of EMR was all the proof he needed. The shimmer jumped again, the ventral shroud no longer as thick as it had been. Gunny had already rotated the ship and fired a broadside at a negative vector through the weakest part of the shimmer. The rounds pierced the veil, and this time he saw them streak, saw them hit, saw the brief flash of illumination. The creature's thousands of eyes appeared as glassy, obsidian, amorphous orbs that all seemed to stare directly at him with disinterested contempt. The creature continued on as though nothing had happened. Cursing, Gunny calculated and fired another missile. As soon as the rockets kicked in, the dim portion of the shimmer lit up again stronger than before. The missile didn't even make it partway inside the perimeter before it hit a cluster of starfish and vaporized them. The shimmer dipped, and Gunny suddenly knew damn well what was about to happen. Streaks of silver filled space, all heading directly at his position, in front of him, behind him, and above him. Gunny flipped the ship as quickly as he could, all while pushing the gravitic engines from 20% to 90% of their capacity. The LeBlanc managed to miss most of the deadly acid, but several portions of her hull turned an unhealthy gray where they'd been struck. After getting out of range, he decelerated, rotated, and prepared to fire another broadside as soon as the Horde came in range. It was all he could do now. Kelly pulled 2 of her claymores but didn't activate either. Instead, she tossed one to the deck 15 meters spinward from her and tossed the other outward, but the same relative distance. If that's just a group coming to join the other group, don't activate the claymores and don't fire. If they swarm us, do both. Aye, sir, the Marine said. Kelly took a deep breath and exhaled in a long, slow stream. The approaching, shimmering abyss reminded her of the terror before the creation of the Neptune Scar and her and Dickerson's rescue. Those moments of facing the starfish face to face, their maws dripping silver, taloned arms scratching against the hardened Atmos steel like diamonds on glass, and looking to do the same to her suit, clawed at her sanity. She shook away the memory and focused on the tunnel. If there was atmosphere in here, what would the creatures sound like? A flock of birds? Do their arms make a flapping noise, or do they glide deadly and silent regardless? Does the rapid contraction and expansion of their mouths make any noise as they spray streams of acid? She hoped never to find out. Here they come, Kuchia said in a strangled, terrified voice. The light in the tunnel dimmed just before the shimmering horde came through. Curled and maglocked to the bulkhead, she and the Marines did their best to appear as immovable portions of the hull. Twice, something had clipped her exposed right shoulder, but each had been a minor collision, more terrifying than damaging. Sit rep. Here, Kuchia said, the horde still moving past them. Hit hard, Osorio said. Losing pressure. Fuck, Kelly thought. The horde was still passing through, fuckers gliding lackadaisically. Now you choose to be slow? How much time, Osorio? The man sounded calm, but she detected panic beneath. 2 minutes and I'm out of air. Kelly flipped through her suit cams trying to find one with a view of the tunnel. All she saw, however, was darkness coupled by the occasional smears of sickly red. How many of these fucking things were there? After a few beats, the darkness lessened as though someone had turned down an opacity dial. She slowly, carefully uncurled from her position until her rear cam feed showed her the immediate area. No more darkness, no more signs of creatures. Kuchia, help Osorio. I'll cover. Copy. Kelly turned and maglocked herself to the bulkhead by 1 foot and 1 hand, the rifle held in her free one. She glanced down the tunnel in either direction and once again saw the darkness near the inhabited portions, while relatively little in the other direction. Kuchia had reached Osorio and had begun applying suit patches. What's the damage, Kuchia? Kelly asked. He's got at least 1 broken rib and his suit took a void of a hit. Looks like the armor is completely gone near his left abdomen and the kidney plate is mangled. Mangled, Osorio said as if through clenched teeth. Good word for it. Down to 2, Kelly thought. Okay, Osorio, you stay maglocked to that bulkhead unless you get swarmed. Same rules apply as far as the claymores. The rack itself had no grav plates, no reason for them, so there was no way to know when the modules would get back gravity, except for what she saw spinward. The darkness that had been moving and writhing seemed to be breaking apart. She wasn't sure, but she thought whatever module they'd been using to crawl through had suddenly become extremely deadly. The cloud moved backward, making Kelly blink. Oh shit, get out of the rack, now! Kuchia and Osorio said nothing for a moment, and neither stirred. It was as if what she'd said had the opposite effect, stunning them rather than getting them to move. She demagged and jetted to the pair, rifle on her back. When she reached them, she tugged each with her hands. Now! She shouted. The pair finally demagged themselves, and Kelly hit her jets, lifting them to the junction. After opening the hatch, she tossed Osorio through and then Kuchia. The red light in the tunnel had dimmed almost to a maroon-smeared shadow. Kelly slammed the hatch. Move! She pushed Osorio toward the tube, leaving Kuchia to guard the hatch. She and Osorio reached the corridor, and gravity greeted her like a lost friend. Osorio hunched over on his knees, gasping for breath. She unslung her rifle and waited for Kuchia to appear. When he finally crawled out, she slammed the maintenance hatch shut. You okay? She asked Osorio. He coughed in a liquid rasp. Lung perforated, I think. Shit, she said, and moved to place 1 arm around his waist. Kuchia joined a moment later, and the 2 carefully led Osorio to the bulkhead. Once he was maglocked to it and forced to straighten his posture despite the pain, he breathed a little easier. Stay awake, Marine, she told him. Aye, sir, Osorio said. The gravity in the module couldn't be more than 0.8 Gs. That was enough to hurt the creatures and make them sluggish, but it wasn't enough to kill them outright. She doubted she could have overloaded the systems for that. Something the trio can plan for on the next rebuild, she thought. Kuchia, this may not keep them out of here for long.
They're going to try and find another way in, maybe through the dead modules on the outer racks. He nodded. Orders, sir? Kelly didn't actually know what to say to that. After a moment, she grasped her rifle and held it in the ready position. For now, we defend that hatch in this module. Give Osorio's nannies a chance to do their job. Aye, sir, Cuccia said, sounding as though he were content. How do you think Beta and Charlie are doing? Good question. If I know Wint, he brought up the gravity in Rack 2 and started shooting. Boy, I hope not, Cuccia said. Glad you didn't set off the claymores. We would have been torn apart by those things. She nodded absently, suddenly worried about Wint and the others. The comms were down, either from the interference field the creatures generated or the array itself had been damaged along with their backups. Vibrations rattled her boots, and she knew the horde had come back this way. A moment later, she felt rather than heard the maintenance hatch being torn open. Cuccia had raised his rifle at the hatch and moved to the bulkhead near Osorio, who pointed at the hatch with his own rifle, aim steady. Kelly took up a position further down the corridor, but with a better line of sight once the hatch opened in the opposite direction. There in the dark, they waited.